How has this pandemic, this shelter in place order, how has that affected your lifestyles? What has changed? What have you had to do differently in the past few months that you've done previously, prior to this time? How has it affected your lifestyle?
Mary's had to cook.
I've had to eat it too.
That's a
And
big
I'm tired of
adjustment.
it.
Tabitha gave a great lesson. She taught a beautiful lesson Sunday
Yeah.
on, making lemonade from the text of First Thessalonians 5, verses 16 through 18, where it talks about pray always and give thanks in every situation. And I thought she demonstrated that beautifully with the lemons and, that we should make lemons in whatever situation we are in. So
Right.
what kind of lemonade have you guys made since this pandemic has started? Anyone made any lemonade?
It's safe to say that all of our prayer lives are better, I would think.
Yeah.
We
Good
have
point.
time to be
Good
with God.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing is, we've talked our life group, most of our life group members have gotten on the Zoom and that we have our life group that way instead of coming over to our house. And we heard from Larry Hunter that he couldn't be with us last Sunday because he was on Zoom with his kids.
Oh,
So
that's a
he's
good
been
reason.
able to,
Yeah.
I don't think he would have done that if we hadn't
Mm-hmm.
maybe gone to life group like that. Maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads me to another question. What good have you seen as a result of this pandemic? What good have you seen come out of this so far?
I saw in the newspaper where lightning bugs are back. I love lightning bugs.
That brings me back to my childhood. We used to catch them in jars when I was little. At night, I used to love to do that. Okay. Lightning bugs. Okay, that's a good thing. Anything else?
I've had to learn new stuff.
Yes.
I've had to learn new skills, and so it is. Lemonade is that I'm not too old to do that. I can learn a little bit.
Absolutely.
So that's good.
That is a good thing. I've also had to expand my knowledge of technology because it's learning new things, and that's a good thing. I love learning, so this is something new to learn.
I resurrected one of my older skills, which was sewing. So
yes,
haven't done for years. So
I
made masks, and so I plan to make additional ones for the women's homeless shelter.
Good. And I've gone back to practicing the piano some, which I hadn't done in actually some years.
Right.
So,
and
with the Zoom, I actually reconnected with 5 of my buddies from college.
Really?
Some of them, a couple of my hadn't actually been together with in 40 years.
Wow.
We had this reunion. We spent 2 hours talking. Just like it's just yesterday that we left and saw each other.
That's awesome.
That's a very good thing. And that's another thing that changed with me also, for just prior to the pandemic, the shelter in place, Reggie and Alejandro and, Dee and Allison and myself, we formed a little music group, and I began playing music after 45 years. I hadn't played music since 1975. And so, being able to play music again, and it reignited my passion to play music. So when the shelter in place order first began, Allison found a drum set that someone was selling, and I went out and bought that drum set real quickly. And so one of the things I do now is I'm at home and I'm playing music,
So you play drums? What else? Do you play anything else?
Yes, ma'am. Drums, all percussion, several percussion instruments, but mostly in the percussion family, yes.
Okay, Reggie, you're playing too?
I play bass guitar.
Bass guitar, all right.
I saw Dee on keyboards.
Yes, she plays
Austin,
keyboard.
where are you?
But these are new things, and these are things that help keep us safe and sane. It keeps us home and it keeps us occupied doing constructive things, rather than complaining about the way things are and what we can't do. These are constructive things that we can do. One of the things that I found that in order to see the good in this pandemic, you have to look at it through the eyes of faith. Because if you look at it through your physical eyes, oftentimes you just can't see the good. But if you look at it from a divine perspective, and that's the whole purpose of this series, was to help us to develop a divine perspective on what's going on. You can actually see good if you look at it from the right perspective. I think about Noah. When God called Noah, instructed him to build an ark, he had to see that through the eyes of faith, because he didn't know, he was not aware of floods and these kind of things, but God instructed him to do it, and he did it. I think about Abraham. When God called him and told him to leave his family and leave his home and go to a place that he had not been before, was not familiar, he had to do that through the eyes of faith, And so a lot of things that we see, a lot of the good that we see through the eyes of faith, because we see a larger picture, than was just before our physical eyes. So let's get into this handout. Mary, would you read that introduction for us, please?
Okay. Say it's on the golden opportunities one?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Okay. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 will go down in history as something that has changed the way we see and live our lives. For some, it has brought death and destruction. For others, it has forced them out of their comfort zones and into a new way of doing life. Looking at it from another perspective, it has showcased the creativity and resilience of people who refuse to be defeated by life circumstances. Depending on your perspective, this pandemic is an absolute nightmare or an opportunity to experience life in a new way. Viewing it from a divine perspective, we can see golden opportunities to demonstrate our faith in a sovereign God, serve God through our service to man, and shine a light in a dark place. In this study, we will discuss some of the golden opportunities that this pandemic has afforded us. It's all about perspective.
Thank you. Now let's look at some of the golden opportunities that we have as a result of this pandemic. Number one on your handout is being a light. We have an opportunity to be a light in a dark place. Under the note, in this pandemic, we have seen the best and worst of humanity demonstrated. Now, I'm sure we've all seen stories on the news of people and people going out of their way to, to make masks for people, to provide meals, and to do things that help people, right? Some stories of people defrauding people of their stimulus checks, people, depriving people and defrauding people. And so bad times brings out the best in people, and it brings out the best in people. It just depends on the character of the person. So how has our influence, or how can our influence and message of hope make a difference in this pandemic? Because one of the opportunities we have is to make a difference. How can we as Christians make a difference?
Yeah, Philippians 4:13, don't be anxious for anything. I think that as we're interacting with people that may show a lot of anxiety and fear and all that, if we have peace about us, that's at this time certainly would cause people to wonder, where is that peace coming from? And it gives us an opportunity to testify to people.
Have you had that opportunity yet? Has anyone inquired about your peace, during this time, and thus giving you an opportunity to share why you have this peace?
I laugh because I'm not trying to see any people, I'm trying to
well, I mean, any kind of way, via telephone or, a Zoom conference or anything.
Yeah, I try to encourage, certainly my family members to, to do well, to take this seriously, and that, people are eager to get back into the mainstream. And I'm like, this is not over. This is nothing that has changed. Right. So we have those talks, but so I guess from that standpoint, it's maybe in their case, they're anxious to get active, and I'm trying to reel them back in to slow down until we get a vaccine or something like that.
Well, the thing is, you can still be active and be safe by doing things that we do, around the house, like you said, going for a walk, or riding a bike, or playing an instrument. Still active things that we do, and keeping ourselves in safe environments, away from out of harm's way. So there's still things that we can do in that
Well, like
regard.
Brad reconnecting with his college buddies,
Right.
and we've
Right.
had virtual game nights with his siblings that live in Colorado and Lubbock and Fort Worth and Dallas, and it's so good to just sit there, be able to laugh with people. And
Absolutely.
and
That fellowship that Reggie talks about, that interaction with other human beings, it's healthy and it's good. And as we found out in this situation, it doesn't always have to be in person. We can do it virtually. We can do it on the phone. There are other ways and that's part of, the new or the good thing about this is we're developing and discovering new ways to communicate and to fellowship with one another. Nothing beats a hug, though.
No, it doesn't.
Nothing beats a hug, a handshake, or a kiss, or a holy kiss. Nothing beats that. But this is the next best thing. At least we have this opportunity to do that.
As Christians, I think we've got a different outlook on life. I think we're happier. From one of my experiences in life, my mother had melanoma cancer, and she for almost 5 years she did chemo on a daily basis.
Wow, for 5 years.
And that was really hard on her. But both Mary and I went and spent time helping take care of her at various points. And, the people at the cancer center go, "We just love seeing your mom come in. She's always so happy. She's always so positive." And I think that's the Christian influence.
Yes.
That allows you to be able to be that way. And in fact, at her funeral, several of the nurses and people from the cancer center came, which you just don't see normally for most people.
Right. So it was her influence, it was her light shining that they saw.
And it probably, I doubt if she ever told people she was a Christian or anything, maybe, but they knew there was something different about her.
And that's the good thing about being Christian. You don't have to advertise it. You don't have to say you are a Christian. Just be a Christian.
Right.
And it shows. People will see that and recognize that there is a difference. So that's a great thing. Any other comments or questions on this part, being a light in a dark place? Because a lot of our influence, as far as how it relates to other people and how other people recognize and does give us opportunities to share our message of hope with them, is how they see us respond, not only to this pandemic, but to all of life's circumstances, every storm that we face. If they see how we respond to it, then that would give them an opportunity to inquire as to why are you responding to these circumstances in that way. That opens the door for you to share, that you have this peace that comes from being in a relationship with God, that transcends understanding, because people look at circumstances and they're like, how can you have peace and joy in these kinds of circumstances? So yeah, it affords us a lot of opportunities, just how we respond. It doesn't always have to be verbal. It could just being a Christian,
Like what you're saying is the way you live your life, people will reach out to you.
Right.
Oftentimes, because they see us laughing and not any cares, but we're not freaking out about the situation that we're in, and they reach out to you and say, what's going on? Why are you?
Many times that is our opportunity to share our testimony, not by preaching the word to them first, but by responding to life in a way that they recognize as different, and then giving, them inquiring of you as to why you responded that way, and now you have an opportunity to share your belief, your faith with them, you know. So look at number 2 on your handout, and this actually goes along with what we're already discussing, and we're talking about golden opportunities. That is having an opportunity to share God's word, to share that message of hope with God through his son, Jesus. Under the note, and you know, you hear a lot in the media about frontline workers, and we absolutely honor our frontline workers, our nurses and first responders and healthcare providers. We honor them because they are doing a tremendous job in putting themselves in harm's way to help people. But we too, as Christians, we are frontline workers in a spiritual sense, because we are frontline workers with a message of hope for people's emotional, mental, and spiritual health. And as you have seen, as this pandemic progressed, that the emotional and mental toll that it has taken on a lot of people, right? And how they've responded to that. But when they see how we respond, and then we share with them why we respond that way. You remember when we were studying the series Life Happens, How Do You Handle it? Do you remember? We mentioned the fact that as Christians, we are not exempt from the storms of life, that we face storms in life just as everyone else did. And we talked about the key to that is Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And at the end of that sermon, Matthew chapter 5 or chapter 7, verses 24 through 27, Jesus says, you know, that if any man hear these sayings of mine and do them, you know, he's likened to a man whose house is built upon a rock. You remember? And we talked about the importance of foundation, that the foundation that you build your life upon is what will determine how you respond to the storms of life. Because when he mentioned about the person who does not hear these sayings of mine, you know, I'll liken him unto a foolish man who built his house upon the sand, and the floods came and the winds blew and the storms, you know, came and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. The same circumstances in both hearers. The storms came, the rain came, the winds blew, and both of their lives, but the difference is the foundation upon which their lives was built, right? And so the storms that we face in life, we face many of the same storms that people in the world face. But our response is different because our foundation is different. And our foundation is built upon the words of God, the word that God spoke, that Jesus taught. Those principles in the Sermon on the Mount will help us, will sustain us through any storm that we can face in this life. Now, we say we are frontline workers. How? How are we frontline workers? And is it because of our attitude? Look at the bullet points that I have there. A, our God is sovereign. We are frontline workers, and we have the attitude that we have, thus the response that we have, because we recognize that God is sovereign, that God is in control, that God either causes or allows every single thing that happens in this world. And he is in control of it all. Whether he caused it or whether he allows it, he still controls it. So if he allows it, he has a purpose for it. So what we have to do is we have to look at and ask ourselves and inquire of God and his word why it is or how it is he wants me to respond in this situation. Because it's all about our response, right? You remember I mentioned about the two agendas, that the devil has an agenda and God has an agenda for everything that happens to us. And how we respond is going to determine whose agenda we advance, right?
And sometimes we cause things ourselves by our choices that are the choices that we make.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm going to share another. Well, let's look at this next point here. B, The benefits of being in covenant relationship with God. Let me ask you a question. What are some of the benefits that we have in covenant relationship with God because of our relationship with God? What's some of the benefits that we have?
Forgiveness of sins.
Okay, let me
grace and mercy.
Technology.
For me too, it's the fact that my future is secure.
Okay.
And there's wonderful steadiness that comes from that, that knowledge.
Whatever happens.
Yeah. And I look around me and I don't know what's going to happen, but my future is secure.
In other words, you don't know what the future holds, but you know who holds the future.
There you go. There you go.
Very good. And so you know you're in good hands, regardless of what you see before your eyes, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a commercial though, Michael.
Yeah, but it's true.
It's true.
That's a good commercial though.
It is a good commercial. I agree.
Okay, look at this. Can you see this slide? These are some benefits that we have. These are some of the benefits of being in a covenant relationship with God through his son. We have access to all spiritual blessings, right? And if you go to Ephesians, you can read what those spiritual blessings are. We have redemption, we have forgiveness of sin. We have all of these spiritual blessings that we enjoy. We have 24/7 unrestricted access to God's throne. That's a biggie. And when you look at certain people, you look at the governor of Texas, do you think you can just pick up the phone and call him and get an audience with him? You think you can pick up the phone and call the White House, call the president, speak to the president or someone like that? There are people who you have to go through in order to get to that person. And if your business is not important enough, you won't get through. Isn't that right? But with God, through prayer, we have 24/7 unrestricted access to his throne. That is a biggie. We have someone to fight our battles for us. You remember David's attitude in 1 Samuel 17 when he stood before Goliath. Saul and the armies of Israel were terrified because they saw the stature of the giant. They heard his voice. They heard his taunting. They were terrified. But David had a track record with God. David understood that his God was able. He delivered him in times past, and he can deliver him now. So he was armed with the idea and the understanding of knowing that God, he's not in his battles alone, that God is with him and God fights for him. Then another benefit that we have being in a covenant relationship with God is that we have an advocate with the Father. That is Jesus Christ. An advocate is someone who stands by your side and pleads your case. And so even when we sin and we repent of our sin, when we confess our sin, Jesus Christ goes before the throne of God and he pleads our case. Picture a courtroom scene. Okay? You have the judge sitting on the bench. You have the defense attorney, you have the prosecuting attorney, right? In this case, the prosecuting attorney, he's the devil. He's the accuser. This is supposed to be your child and look at how he's living. Look what he did. He did this terrible thing. Jesus, our advocate, our defense attorney, goes before the throne of God and said, yes, he did that thing, but he confessed his sin and my blood paid for that sin. And the judge will say, not guilty. That's good news, y'all. And that's all that's in 1 John chapter 2 that I just mentioned to you. So we have an advocate with the Father. Jesus Christ pleads our case. That's good news. And we're talking about being frontline workers. We're talking about, the message of hope that we have to share with people, not only during this time, but in times of storms with anyone that we come in contact with who wants to know why we have the attitude and response to the storm that we have. These are things that we can share with them. See, there is a larger picture, the spiritual battle. We can help people to understand because all they see is the scene before them. All they see are the bad things that's happening to them. Take, for instance, the 2 dams that burst. Where's that, in Michigan?
Yeah.
Now, imagine what these people are feeling. They're already dealing with a pandemic. Their lives are already affected by that. And then on top of that, the dam bursts, the waters rise, and now they're flooded out and have to evacuate their homes, which is really kind of difficult during the time now where you don't really have a lot of places to go. But understanding, and a person who's going through that, can you hear them saying, why is God allowing this to happen? I mean, how can I see any goodness in God? How can I have any belief in God when all of these things are happening to me? When we have an opportunity to share with people who are undergoing circumstances like that listen, these circumstances are terrible, but there's a larger picture here, because the larger picture is that the devil has an agenda for what you're going through, and God has an agenda for what you're going through. And so how you respond to this, and the devil's ultimate goal is to overthrow our faith in God. His ultimate goal is to cause us to distrust God, to be distracted by our circumstances and give up on God, which a lot of people do under these kind of circumstances, because they cannot see, or they don't understand how God can be sovereign, be in control, and allow these things to happen. But when we help them to understand, and what's the first thing we have to do? Kevin can help me with this one. Kevin, something you said a couple of weeks ago about what we should do when people are under, when they're in circumstances that's really hard and difficult for them. What's the first thing we need to do with them? You mentioned it a few weeks ago.
I'm kind of paraphrasing. I think it's important we listen to them first and foremost, and then come alongside.
And come alongside them, and empathize and sympathize with what they're going through, and try to help supply their immediate need. Right?
Right. Correct.
Because that demonstrates to them that we care. And you remember we talked about how Jesus, in his earthly ministry, that's what he did. He showed people that he cared about their whole man. He supplied their physical needs. If they were hungry, he fed them. If they were sick, he healed them, right? And in that way, they were more receptive to the spiritual lesson, the spiritual message that he had. So in times like these, the dams breaking, people being flooded, people being, isolated, and all of the things that's going on with this pandemic, what we can do is, if we have opportunity, and I'm going to explain this in a few moments, as we can come alongside them in whatever way we can, whatever capacity that we have and opportunity that we have, to first of all let them know that they're not alone, to let them know that someone cares and someone is willing to help them in any way that we can, right?
Correct.
And then D, the power of perspective, the difference a divine perspective makes. And we're talking about us being frontline workers, us being people who can help people through crisis situations. When we help people to understand that your perspective is the key to your response, if you have the correct perspective, if you have a good perspective on things, then you'll respond to it in the correct way. In this pandemic, there have been people who have committed suicide. There have been people who committed murder/suicide in this pandemic. That was their response to the circumstances that they were faced with in this pandemic. And it's all because of their perspective, how they saw it. They saw it as being a hopeless situation. They saw it as being something that had no end. So your perspective is the key. If we can help people understand things from a divine perspective, now understand this, we cannot control what people think. We can share with them, we can come beside them, and we can help them, but we can't control what they think. Because I know some people, it doesn't matter what you say, they're going to think what they think, they're going to believe what they believe. You can't control that. But our responsibility as frontline workers spiritually is to share that information. Now, here's the question for the rest of the discussion. Do you know what your individual role is as a frontline worker? And I'll give you a hint. It is tied to your gift. So I guess the question then becomes, do you know what your gifts are? Because your role, your purpose is tied to your gift.
I always thought that giving and serving.
Okay.
Probably my gift. Because I remember working in the kitchen on Wednesday nights, and that was just being able to serve people, and then when they come through, interact with them and encourage them and just be kind to people. That was, that was always, and it uplifted me as much as it did others.
Yes. Okay, great. Anyone else? Well, let me ask you, let me expand upon that then. Have you had an opportunity since the pandemic started to use that gift? The gift of serving, the gift of encouraging. Have you had opportunity in this pandemic, whether virtually, on phone or whatever, to use that gift?
Some.
Okay.
Because, people get down and you're able to show them something silly or just listen. Like Kevin said a while ago, just be there to listen. Because people don't want you always trying to solve issues. They just want someone to be there for them and listen.
Right. I've discovered that too. Anyone else?
For years, I didn't know what my gift was, and I would ask my friends, and I've been told that I'm very resourceful, that I'm a very resourceful person. And I recently found out that my gift is service also. I love customer service. I guess that's why I've been in it for all my life. But there have been people that have lost jobs, and they knew that I worked at Workforce Solutions, and they couldn't get through to the unemployment office. And so I gave them the back number because I can remember numbers for some reason opposed to names, but I remember numbers, and then I keep information because I like to have reference to those things. And so I was able to get them the number so that they could get through when people couldn't get through to the unemployment, and assisted some people with resumes, and actually given people emails, or I should say an email to someone that worked at Workforce Solutions. Although the office isn't open, I have connections there, and they're working at home. So I was able to help them in that way by giving them that information, and then of course making the masks for those that didn't have them as well.
Great.
You helped me tremendously in finding out how to get Lifeway stuff without having to go through the online thing. So that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that much. It doesn't really have anything to do with the pandemic, but I think it is a gift-pointed thing.
You benefited from her gift.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyone else? I sent you a handout on this, God's gifts to the church. And for those of you who don't have access to your handout right now, I created a slide so that you can see. In the introduction of the handout that I gave, it says, in order to accomplish the work of the Lord's church, God gave gifts to enable it to grow and perform the work assigned to it. Listed below are the gifts given to the church and their purpose. So this first slide is a list of the miraculous gifts that God gave And the gifts are listed here: wisdom, gifts of healing, tongues, faith, knowledge, prophecy, miracles, discerning spirits, interpretation of tongues. These are miraculous or sign gifts. And the scriptures there are 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 11, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12. Purpose. Why did God give these gifts? He gave these gifts for revelation, to reveal his will and to confirm his word. You remember that during the early church, when in the infancy of the church, they didn't have the written record. They didn't have the completed New Testament. So the apostles and those who had these gifts had to perform wonders and miracles in order to confirm the word that they taught, the message that they taught. And so that was the purpose of those gifts. Then the second set of gifts here are ministerial or speaking gifts. And these gifts listed are the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastor, teachers. These gifts are outlined in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 7 through 11. Purpose: for the equipping of the saints, for work of service, edification of the body of Christ. That's in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. Actually, I'd like for someone to read that for me. Mary, would you read that for me? Ephesians chapter 4,
Okay.
verses 7 down through verse 16, please.
Let me get to it.
Okay. Any questions or comments anyone have before we get there? 7 through 16, actually.
7 through 16. Okay. Yes. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he led captives to his train and gave gifts to men. What does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended earlier, or ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. It was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, and some to be pastors and teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ.
Thank you. So you see, God gave these gifts to the church: the gift of leadership and the gift of workers, servants, ministers, in order to perform the work that the Lord has given. Keep in mind, now, big picture, the Great Commission is that we are charged to make disciples of all of the nations, right? We are to go into all of the world and make disciples. That mission is accomplished through three mediums: through evangelism, benevolence, and edification. These gifts all enable people to accomplish that. Some people have the gift to evangelize, the speaking gift, the leadership gifts. Some people have gifts, to serve, benevolence, to edify. Some people have gifts to build people up. So all of these gifts that God has given has not just been so that people can have gifts, but so that these gifts can equip his church in order to do the mission that he has given us. The third set of gifts, motivational or service gifts, come from Romans chapter 12, verses 4 through 8. Mary, while you're there, or anyone else who would like to read that, well, let me read these gifts first listed: prophecy, ministry, teaching, mercy, exhortation, giving, leadership, purpose, to accomplish the mission of the Lord's church through evangelism, benevolence, and edification, is what I just mentioned about. So who would like to read for me Romans chapter 12, verses 4 through 8?
I'll take it.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully.
Thank you. And look at this conclusion here, this final note that I have here. The gifts given to each member of the body of Christ are given by God's grace and according to every person's ability. Therefore, there is no need to be jealous or envious of another's gifts. The gifts of every member is designed to glorify God and benefit the body. Since we are all members of the body, the gifts of others benefit us as well. Romans chapter 12, verses 4 through 6, Ephesians 4, verse 7, 1 Corinthians 12, verses 11 through 30 says what I just read there. So every person in the body has a gift or gifts that was given to God, given by God, and given according to his grace and according to the person's individual ability. And the purpose of it is to advance the work of the Lord, to accomplish the mission that he gave the church. And that's why I asked the question, do you know what your gift is? Because when you have identified your gift, now you know what your purpose is. Now you know what your function is, and you know what it is you need to be doing as a frontline worker. Okay? Any questions, comments? And you know, it's ironic. Let me share this with you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul was dealing with an issue. The church at Corinth was divided over spiritual gifts. There were those who had gifts that they considered to be superior to other people's gifts. Those who had the gift to speak in tongues and those who had, certain gifts, they thought that their gift was better than those who had other gifts. Paul used an analogy from anatomy. He used the human body to demonstrate that even though it's one body, even though it has many members, and all of these members have different functions, it's still one body. Have you ever been on an airplane? Have you ever taken a trip on a jet, an airplane? When you get on the plane, the flight attendant comes over the public address system and she says her name and she says the pilot's name, right? Now, you conclude that these are important people because she called their name. But have you ever heard a flight attendant call the name of the person who put the fuel in the plane? Have you ever heard the flight attendant call the name of the person who put the air in the tires?
No.
Have you ever heard the flight attendant call the name of the person who puts your luggage on the plane?
No.
Do you think their role is important?
Just as important.
If their role is not important, try flying at 37,000 feet in the air and run out of fuel. The person who put the fuel in the plane, his job is important.
Yeah.
If you don't think the guy who puts the air in the tires' job is important, try landing a plane as fast as it's going and as heavy as it is, and there's no air in the tire. If you don't think the baggage handler's job is important, try flying from Houston to LA and your luggage is in New York. Their jobs are important. The point is they have different functions, and even though their name is not called, their role is important to the overall mission objective of the flight, which is to get you from point A to point B safely, right? Every member of the body of Christ, brothers and sisters, has a function in the Lord's church. Every one of us has been gifted by God to perform a service, a function, with the end of accomplishing the mission that the Lord gave the church. So it behooves all of us to find out what our gifts are and use those gifts, especially in times like these. If you have a gift to teach, you need to be teaching. If you have gifts of service, serve. In any way that you can, whatever capacity you have. If you have the gift of encouragement, if you have the gift of giving, that's important right now because there's so many people whose livelihoods have been, disrupted and who are in financial need. So if you have a gift of giving, and that is a gift that comes from God, then we need to utilize whatever gift we have to do that. Isn't that right? So all of our roles are important. Yes. Okay, and then finally, the last point on our handout, number 3, and we're talking about golden opportunities that we have during these times to evaluate our lives. It was mentioned at the beginning of the class that this lockdown, this, what you call it, self-quarantine, whatever, however you want to phrase it, has afforded us an opportunity to assess our relationship with God, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. To draw closer to God or realize how far we are away from God, but to evaluate where we are. It has given us an opportunity to examine our priorities. What are some ways that this time has afforded us to examine our priorities? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Michael. I think we've been so busy. I guess busyness would probably be meaning we're so busy doing stuff. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we kind of put like our spiritual stuff on the back burner until something major goes down. And I think this pandemic is kind of like help us sort of pump the brakes a little bit and help us. I know for me, it's help me, I guess, evaluate where I am as far as my spiritual walk is concerned. And it's knowing that I'm good in some areas, mm-hmm. and there's some areas that I'm going to need God's help in working on. And I want to be proactive in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Amen. It's helped a lot of people slow down and to develop something, or at least acknowledge and recognize something that a lot of people are lacking, and that's patience. This pandemic has caused a lot of people to have to develop patience, right? Because we have no other choice.
Right. And
go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
And I'm usually the most patient person on the planet. But sometimes, and I'll admit, my patience can get a little short. And I'm having kind of like give up. You normally when Tasha is like really feeling anxious, mm-hmm. I have to tell her to like pump the brakes and breathe. Mm-hmm. You're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm not having to do that for myself. I'm like, Kev, pump the brakes and breathe. You're okay. You're still breathing. You're all right. Mm-hmm. God's blessed you in many ways. In many ways you can't even begin to count. Yeah. So just this will pass.
Right. Ironically, a lot of people ask for patience, and a lot of people pray for patience. But you know how God answers that prayer? Gail understand.
Make you develop it.
Be careful what you wish for, because you're gonna get it.
James chapter 1, verse 2. My brother, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptation, knowing this, that the testing of your faith produces patience or endurance. So if you're asking for patience, if you need patience, God is going to send what you need in order to develop patience, and that's a storm. And so a lot of people are learning that lesson right now, and developing patience through this storm that we're presently going through right now, right? Okay, C on your handout, and we're talking about opportunities to evaluate our lives. Implement changes in our lifestyles. We spoke about that at the beginning of the call, that, we're having to implement some changes in our lifestyle. And one of the good things is that we're seeing now that we are able to implement changes in our lifestyle. Some people are so rigid, in their lifestyles, and they are forced into a situation where, okay, now you have to make some changes. Now you can't function and do life as you've always done it. Now you have to, as we said in the Marine Corps, improvise, adapt, and overcome. You have to learn how to make some adjustments, right? And a lot of people are doing that, and we're beginning to see that we can do that. What I love, the other day I saw a program, I think it was Sunday, about the 2020 graduates. They did a special on the 2020 graduates. A lot of our graduates are disappointed about the way things are going. They're unable to go to their proms, unable to walk across the stage. But you know what I saw? One of the things that I see in the 2020 class of graduates, whether it's high school, college, or whatever, this class will go down in history as the most creative and resilient class that this country, that the world has ever seen, because I have seen so many instances of creativity of our students, our seniors doing creative things. I mean, from virtual proms to, drive-by graduation ceremonies. I have seen so many innovative and creative things. If it weren't for this pandemic, we would not have seen that. And no graduating class prior to 2020, to my knowledge, has ever done anything like that. So looking at that from a divine perspective, we see resilience and we see creativity in this 2020 class. Isn't that right?
Yep. The other interesting thing is this class, a lot of them started there, they were born in the year of 9/11. Now they've got 2020 in there as well.
Wow. So the bookends were, bad situations, but they made lemonade from their lemons.
That's right.
It's all about your perspective. It's all about how you see it. And I see a lot of these young people, I've seen them taking this thing and doing creative things with it because of their perspective. They refuse to be defeated by life circumstances. So they're taking their lemons and they're making some beautiful, pictures of lemonade with this. And then finally, on your handout, this affords us an opportunity to be proactive in our health and wellness. That is a biggie for me, because we are now, as you said earlier, we're doing more home cooking. People are cooking more, eating out less and eating, but a lot of people are cooking home cooked meals, and they are exercising at home. Reggie's getting ready to go do some walking. We are being proactive. And you know why? Because ultimately our health and our wellness is in our own hands. A lot of what our bodies respond to and react to is a result of things that we put in our body. Our immune system, if our immune system is strong, it'll ward off viruses and bacteria that we're exposed to all the time. But because of the weakened immune system, the compromised immune system of a lot of people's bodies, they are more susceptible to contracting viruses and getting sick. So this has given us an opportunity to take a look at ourselves, take a look at our diets, take a look at our lifestyles and some of our habits, and helps us to be proactive in doing things. And I started doing that in 2015 when I had a situation where I almost died. That's when my journey to health and wellness began in 2015. It was my wake-up call. But we all have an opportunity and a responsibility, actually, to be proactive in our own life, health and wellness. Because at the end of the day, guess what? When we stand before God, we're going to stand there by ourselves, for ourselves. We're going to have to give an account to God as to what we've done in our bodies. Isn't that right? We are going to have to answer for ourselves.
We gotta own it.
We have to own it, and we have to answer for it. Okay. Now, finally, I'm closing now. What are some lessons that we've learned in this pandemic? Have you learned any lessons?
There's a lot of things that I thought were important that aren't really important.
So priorities. You learn priorities. Yeah, that's a good one. And I have that on my list. Anyone else? So like what, Mary? Just name something. Give me something.
Like one thing, every Thursday I'd run up to Magnolia and work in the library up there, and and meetings and stuff like that. And the world's not going to end because I'm not doing all this.
Okay, good. Anyone else learn any lessons?
It's good to slow down sometimes.
Absolutely. It's good to slow down.
Smell the roses.
Anyone else? And then I'll just read you my list here.
I guess my number one takeaway from this is that God is in control. God's in control, and no matter what's going to happen, as followers, as Christ followers, He's in control, and all we got to do is follow His lead.
Mm-hmm.
And He's going to teach us something. May not be, it might be unexpected, might not be what you're accustomed to, but
mm-hmm.
we can just take it and run with it,
mm-hmm.
and it's going to be for the better.
Right. Absolutely. Anyone else?
And that, I think of that verse in James about don't say tomorrow. Sorry about this plane.
Okay.
Don't say tomorrow we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You do not know, and I've learned that this year more than ever. We don't know the future. We just know who holds the future.
You have something to do it today, because tomorrow's not promised. Absolutely. Let me just read my list, and then we're gonna close out. The list of lessons that I wrote down. As Kevin said, God is sovereign. He's in control. And because He's in control, there's no need for me to fear, because I know that He has it under control. You know, Reggie said that a couple of weeks ago, that God's got our back. He's got this. And so when we know that, we don't have to fear. Second thing I have is that we must trust God. We must trust God, even when we can't understand, even when we don't see what's happening or understand the circumstances around us. We trust God. And if we trust God, another reason not to fear. See, people matter more than politics, race, religion, etc. That's a lesson that I think we've learned in this pandemic. We see people helping people, not Republicans helping Republicans, Democrats helping Democrats. We see people helping people. And that's a priority. That's more important. So I think this, and it's funny how every time there's a disaster, we saw it with Harvey, we saw it with 9/11. Every time there's a disaster, we see people pulling together to help people. It's not about your political affiliation. It's not about your religion or anything like that. It's about people helping people. That's a lesson that we learned in this pandemic. D, difficult times creates opportunities to reflect on God's love and share His word. And we discussed that in the body of the lesson. E, we must be proactive in our own health and wellness. We discussed that. And then finally, that there is value in the valley. And some of the lessons that we learned in this valley is that we are not sufficient of ourselves. We cannot do this alone. We need God. Another lesson that we learned in this valley is that materialism is useless. You can have all the money in the world, but if you can't do anything, your money can't buy everything that we need right now, right? And then we learn patience in the valley. There are some lessons that can only be learned, or that's better learned in the valley. And these are some of the lessons that we'll learn. So any closing comments or questions? Next week, we're going to wrap up the series by talking about the final victory that we have, the ultimate reason why we don't need to fear what's going on in these times. And we're going to look at keeping our eyes on the prize, because that's what the devil's response is. That's what his agenda is, to cause us to be distracted. But if we keep our eye on the prize, and we're going to look at an example of that, we will make it across the finish line to our crown. Regardless of what happens in this life, regardless of what we experience in this life, if we keep our eye on the prize and we finish the race, finish our course, fight the good fight, and keep the faith, we will receive the crown that God has for us. That's good news for me, y'all. And that's the reason why I have the perspective that I have on what's going on in the world today. Closing comments, questions? Be blessed, family. Enjoy the rest of your week. Love you all.
Thank you.
See you next week, Lord willing. You're welcome. Take care, family.
Bye. Take care, Kevin.
All righty.
You just
bye-bye.
Good night.
Night.